It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. Guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
Welcome for the 143rd time to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted from Tamaki, Makaurau, Auckland, New Zealand. My name is Lewis. I am the host of the show. It is a long-form conversation with a guest, and this week's guest is a fantastic podcast guest in terms of being generous with his responses, really freaking interesting, insightful, and knowledgeable. And we discussed a whole lot of topics that I have a long-term interest in, but that Mazbou has a contemporary take on in terms of being a musician and now really successful content creator. So it was just great to get insight from someone out there doing it, as it were. He kind of hit another level of engagement when he started discussing kind of timing and rhythm in hip-hop, rapping, flow, and cadence, namely polyrhythms. We talk a little bit about that. I get a private bloody lesson from the rap scientist, as they've dubbed him online. Talk about social media algorithms in general. That sounds really dry and dull, isn't it? It's talking about how, social media, that's just for better or for worse, enmeshed in all our lives these days, about how, particularly how people creating posts and content on that now, how that's changed, as Mazbou said, what he sees it and what he says made a lot of sense to me, and I've kind of seen it playing out as well. We talk about cultural appropriation. We talk about commercial radio ignoring social issues, namely when Maz was involved in the Black Lives Matters protests as one of the organisers, and then kind of went to my FM afterwards and said, hey, you guys don't talk about any of this, but you play African-American hip-hop music. We talk about his experience from his social media posts, having him end up at Berklee School of Music in the US. Yes, sounds crazy, but it's true. And the nervous scenario of one of the many lectures he did involving him standing in front of a bunch of music professors and musicologists and talking to them about music. Yeah, interesting. Really great chat. Again, I want to get out of the way. These intros used to be way too long and indulgent. It's currently Saturday here. Don't know what time or day it is, wherever it is you're listening, but I need to get some dishes out of the dishwasher and I need to go to the gym. All that regular day-to-day stuff. Verbal Highs Podcast on Facebook, Verbal Highs on Instagram, Verbal Highs on Twitter. There's a website, verbalhighs.com, that also shows some of the other projects I am involved with, namely running the New Zealand Podcasting Summit, which happens May every year. It's on May 11th. As I speak this year, 2024, you can find that separately at nzpodsummit.com. Thanks, Maz.
Verbal high, straight down from up above.
I was born in Liverpool, UK. My parents had been doing their postgrad studies in the UK, where they had my older sister, who's 6.5 years older than me, in Southampton, and then me in Liverpool. My dad was doing a lot of travelling because he's a doctor. And then he found a position in Tamaki, Makaurau, Aotearoa, so he moved the family over in 1990. So I was only 16 months old when we arrived in South Auckland. Our first home was in Manurewa in Hill Park. And so I grew up going to Hill Park Primary School, Green Meadows Intermediate, and Manurewa High School. And I studied music quite fervently throughout it. And, I was determined to do it in university, but my parents said no to that. So I ended up doing computer systems engineering, sort of utilizing the sort of more technical side of my mind, but my heart was with music the whole time. So even though I was studying engineering, I was doing music on the side, and I started a band, and I was doing all that kind of stuff. And when I'd worked for 6.5 years afterwards in software, I finally took the leap and did music full time.
That's a thorough answer. So, turning around and saying, if someone said, you're a Scouser, you're a Liverpudlian or whatever they call them, that's kind of an administrative thing, man, because you have no recollection or kind of connection to being there,
no
right?
recollection. My godparents are still in Liverpool. It was quite funny. I went and saw them in 2018 when I was on tour in the UK. And I expected to, because I'd supported Liverpool my whole life in the Premier League. So I expected to go home and have a great conversation about supporting Liverpool, and then it turns out they don't even support Liverpool; they support Leeds. That was kind of weird, but so I was like, that was almost an identity crisis for me, because I'm like, my only real connection to there was my godparents, and they don't even support Liverpool.
Wrong team.
Exactly.
You're kind of, it sounds a bit cheesy, but you're kind of a global citizen in a lot of ways, man. So
Yeah.
like it's a big question early on, but like, what's your sense of identity there?
Yeah, it's difficult to pin down, because and this is super cliche for people in my position, but yeah, like literally everywhere that I'd be tempted to find strong affinity for in terms of my home, there's something that reminds me that I'm not actually really from there. And that's everywhere. That's New Zealand, that's Nigeria, that's England, that's anywhere that I place my feet. So yeah, it's been a challenging one trying to form an identity. I've really just had to dig in and find one in myself, and just be okay with the kind of floatingness or the limbo that third culture people like myself find themselves in. I've just had to be okay with that.
That's the term, third culture, right? That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And like, you make me think as you say that, like, there'd be a shittier side to that in terms of like basically the attitudes of some others. But what I would hope as an optimist is that side of negotiating it gets better as kind of people in general get smarter and we get more global, and you know what I mean. It's like a lot of that feeling of being an outsider or whatever can be like a system that you don't really fit into. But I would hope that would be changing. Like, for example, for you, when your daughter goes through schooling and stuff, you just hope that humans get better at all of this the longer we go at it.
Yeah, I think there will be an improvement in her experience versus my own, especially because when my family migrated here, we were among the first African families to be here. So New Zealand, broadly speaking, really didn't even know what Africans were. You know what I'm saying? Like, they didn't know who we were culturally. They didn't know who we were as a people. They didn't really know what to do with us. Since then, which, it's been 30 odd years now, there's been quite a heavy influx of African migrants. And they're sort of all around the country, mostly concentrated in Auckland though. And so, yeah, I think New Zealand's sort of more aware that we're here, and they sort of, and also what's helped is the strong establishment of Afrobeats as a mainstream genre. That's been huge.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because like most of what the trendy music that young people listen to are from Nigerian artists, which is really buzzy to me, by the way, because these are a lot of the artists and kind of music that I grew up listening to at Nigerian parties that I thought no one thought was cool. And they didn't think it was cool at the time. So by proxy, I didn't think it was cool either. And then, so it was a very surreal experience the first time. I remember I was like walking along Mission Bay, and I saw these group of people playing out their big like JBL system. They're playing like a WizKid song. And I was like, I had to double take. I'm like, oh, they're Africans at the beginning. And then I saw them, and they're like, wait, they're not African. Why are they playing WizKid? How do they know who WizKid is? And that's when I kind of realized that, wow, this genre has actually transcended like just sort of African and gone into wider pop culture. And then, yeah, so that's been a big door for us to walk through.
That's kind of what I was getting at, with just getting smarter, and often fear of the other is ignorance, right? I'm totally preaching to the choir here, but what I was going to say, it's come up on the show before. I hadn't thought about it till you said it. Like, I've said on more than one occasion to guests, like, I think food and music are two really good ways to introduce people to kind of different cultures and experiences,
Yeah.
So I hear that. So with Africa, obviously, really large continent. If we stick to kind of like Nigerians in New Zealand, and you say for Africa and Africans in general, you guys were, I guess, kind of early settlers here. Was there any sense of a network or a community kind of pre-internet in New Zealand? Like, did you guys know of? Because I think of like Izzy, right, whose family settled in Rotorua. Was there any sense of are there other Nigerians outside of Auckland?
100%. Yeah, like we knew everyone.
Yeah.
So I think my family would have been the third or fourth Nigerian family, maybe third.
Man. Yeah.
And then, like Israel Adesanya, his family were a couple years after us, and then a couple of other families. And like we basically were involved in starting the Nigerian community here. And that was initially literally a couple of families. And so when Nigerian migrants came here, we quickly found out who they were, and we quickly sort of grafted them in, and so the community grew that way. It was a long time before it would be the case that a Nigerian would be in New Zealand and we didn't really immediately know who they were. For the longest time, we was like, of course we know who they are. Like,
speaking of knowing who Nigerians are, I was going to put this to you today when I was thinking about it. Could he be the most famous Nigerian on the planet right now? Is he?
Israel Adesanya?
Yeah.
He would be up there.
He'd be up
and
there.
Anthony Joshua would be up there as well. Yeah.
And you guys are exactly the same age. I noticed that too. So if you did, know Nigerians New Zealand wide, I presume you knew Izzy before he was a fighter.
Yes, yeah. Our families, did know each other. So we're from different ethnic groups. He's Yoruba and I'm Igbo. So, and because within Nigeria, even here, our ethnic groups kind of have their own communities. So, for that reason, we weren't really in a circle with each other. Yeah, but we definitely knew each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, in terms of area of Nigeria coming from, because I had a look, not huge distance away, but I thought about all of that. And so, without getting too into the weeds, is there things like potentially religious differences and so on? Like, that side of Nigeria I don't know so well.
Between mine and Izzy's group, no. Like, most of like Yoruba people and Igbo people are Christian. It's the north that are mainly Muslim, and those are mainly Hausa people. That said, there are there's different peoples who have different sort of religious convictions, but broadly speaking, it's like the north is Muslim and the south is Christian. So yeah, most of whom migrate here, who come from the south or even the middle of Nigeria, are probably Christian.
And reasons for migrating, I think of there's so many examples, but I think of all the wars in Europe in the early 90s and the kind of Serbs and Croats and so on that ended up here. And a lot of the case of migration here, is it just for the hope of a easier go of it, a better life, or is it because of some unrest or something back home?
It's the usual, like the land being ravaged by colonial violence and the legacy of colonial violence causing corruption and.
See, I need to hear this and learn all about it.
And so it's my parents and so many other people. They try to get away from the corruption, and sort of
Have you been back there? Because you were born somewhere else. You lived here all your life. Have you been?
Yep, I've been back a few times to Nigeria. It's been a while since the last time I've been back, but I've been back a few times. And first when I was quite young, and second when I was high school age, and third when I was uni age. And sort of every time I was back, sort of became easier and more enjoyable. The first time was quite a culture shock. But as I got older, and the sort of question of identity became more and more answered, and more and more. I was more and more satisfied with who I was and the tension of being a Nigerian New Zealander. So when I was older, going back to Nigeria is a lot more pleasant to deal with, and I could navigate the fact that I felt like a foreigner back there. So that was a hard thing when I was young, feeling like a foreigner in Nigeria, because my whole life. As a young person was sort of defined by feeling like a foreigner in New Zealand. So for me to go back, because everyone was telling me to go back to where I was from. So for me to finally go back to where I was from and then still be treated like a foreigner was very difficult.
And also maybe that internal pressure on yourself of I'm supposed to feel connected here. I'm supposed to feel like this is interesting. When did you first pick up an instrument? And what was it?
So my parents made me play piano when I was 4. Classical piano. I started Trinity College exams. I started working my way up, and then I got to grade 3 and I got bored of it. And then my best friend at the time, he played drums, and so I'd go over to his house and watch him play drums, and he played all these really cool bands like Tool and Slipknot and POD. So that was my sort of I got into drums, and that was my entrance into music loving and music creation. That was the first genre I really fell in love with. It was metal and rock.
So you got into metal quite young. I remember someone gave me because obviously I'm 48. You must be late 30s.
35.
Oh, no, hang on,
35 soon.
Hang on. I'm 47. I'm not at this age. You got to take what you can get. But so for me, it was that for me. I mean, radio was big back then. So that thing of like discovering, like liking music on the radio, starting to develop your tastes,
Yes.
figuring out what you do like and you don't like. But then the shift from like Guns N' Roses back then, which was on the radio, to like someone giving me a copy of Kill 'Em All when I was 12 or 13, the Metallica album was like almost, oh my God, this is almost like taboo sounding, you know. But what I'm getting is, it sounds like you got into quite heavy music quite young.
Yes.
Younger than I did.
Yeah. So I think around, it would have been 11, 12 where I started listening to those bands and got into them. And yeah, I was also brought up Christian, so I was heavily into the Christian music scene as well. And the Christian metal scene was prolific. Like there was a lot of metal bands doing their stuff there. They were basically, and I guess the whole thing was like, yo, we are the metal, we are the Christian version of your favorite secular bands that your parents will let you listen to because you know we don't have demonic lyrics. So that was kind of my segue into all that kind of music.
Right,
as
but
well.
there's all those the Christian bands. Like I saw that growing up too, and I actually saw something I can't remember, somewhere on a documentary somewhere recently that was gone into as well, like the amount of insane musical talent that's often in Christian bands, because that's how you come on through and kind of come out, you know, that's the sort of bridge to playing in other bands.
There was a whole industry, and it was interesting because what tended to happen was like Christian saw it as a more smooth segue into like a musical, a successful career, because I guess the mentality was, well, since we're Christian, our community's got to support us, right? Which unfortunately led to almost like, if we're going to be honest, a lower quality of music, because there wasn't as much attention paid in the fact that we're making good music. You know, it was like the message and the community was what was expected to carry. So a lot of the Christian bands were just cheap knockoffs of the secular bands, which, you know. But that said, there was some legitimate talent there for sure. But you know, just being honest, that was the kind of vibe.
But then you also get, like, I'm sure I've seen something recently, I'm not going to recall it, so I'm not going to try, but they were like, basically like people who stick around in those bands, you know, like say they end up on an international circuit or whatever, and like a member's like totally wiling out in
absolutely.
In a non-Christian way,
absolutely.
but sticks at it
I
because
don't know.
Like a great
Have
gig,
you heard
you
the
know?
band As I Lay Dying?
I've heard of them.
Yeah, so they were one of the bigger, even at the time, even one of the biggest secular metalcore bands, but they were definitely one of the biggest Christian metalcore bands. Now, the lead singer literally went to jail for hiring a hitman to kill his wife. This was all happening while they were claiming to be a Christian. So when that all started going down,
I was just meaning partying, not
no. We
hits
got
out
much
on
worse than that. So when that stuff all started going down. And that's when those revelations came out about the fact that, a lot of these band members aren't actually Christian. They're just, you know, they're playing the industry essentially.
And did you, speaking of rites of passage in the New Zealand education system as a musician, end up in a rock quest band?
Yes, yeah, I did. Actually, that was probably my rock. I'd say rock quest is the reason why I took music seriously, because I did a couple of rock quest bands. So I was a drummer. As I said, I got into drums, and my junior years in high school, I was playing drums. So I did a couple of rock quest attempts as a drummer in a punk band. But then in my seventh form, my year 13 year, my music teacher signed basically the same group of boys up with one of our younger siblings who'd sort of come into high school. He signed us up to be in a rock quest band. I assumed I'd be the drummer again, but he made me be the vocalist. And I was like, this is very weird. What's going on here? And I told him, like, hey, Mr. Randall, like, I can't really sing like that. He's like, well, you've got 3 weeks to learn. We've got an itinerant vocalist. You better learn how to sing. And I was like, oh my God.
So out of everyone, why? Because you don't often think, the drummer's a natural fit for the vocalist, because there's also the frontman side of it. Like, what was it he saw in you? Was it that the potential for a charismatic frontman, or he'd heard you sing, or a little bit of column A and column B? Yeah,
so I'd been doing some backing vocals whilst I was on drums for those punk bands. So he probably had heard me sing, and then he probably just saw my general charisma and sort of like natural leadership, and thought, like, you know, once you tidy up your vocal chops a little bit, you'll be great. And he was right, and I fell in love with being a vocalist. Like, it didn't take long for me to be like, actually, I really love being up here.
Did your band, please tell me your band had a name that you're really embarrassed about now? I love rock quest band names.
Our name was Roadrunner. It was crazy.
Roadrunner or Roadrunner?
Roadrunner, like the cartoon.
Roadrunner's okay.
Yeah, it's not too bad. So we were actually the first band, I believe, from our high school to win the Rock Quest regionals, which was a massive deal because Rock Quest just wasn't even big at our school. to begin with. And so for our band to have done that was quite amazing. We didn't get any further than that, but it was a big deal for us for sure.
I think it's still a big thing. It's one of those things that's kind of enjoyed because, as you know, like particularly around my generation, because I think it started around the time I started college. But there's just a roll call of like really big New Zealand musicians now who've been through RockQuest in one way, shape, or form. Did you have you toyed with the idea, played around with being the drummer vocalist? I always find that setup quite out of it. When you
it never really appealed to me. It always, like, every time I thought of a drummer, I thought of more a BVs. A drummer as a lead, never really, because I felt like the lead vocalist needs to be able to really engage with the crowd and on multiple levels. There's stuff just about the physicality of being able to move forward, move laterally, engage with different, people that you see in the front row and the back, all these kind of things that you can't really do as a drummer because you're just not mobile.
Who am I thinking of? Who's the famous example?
Phil
the White
Collins,
Stripes, right? Phil Collins, yes, Phil Collins. The White Stripes? No, have I got that totally wrong? I thought the White Stripes.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right about that. Yeah.
You're somewhere in the middle to upper end of between the age of my students now and myself. Mm-hmm. And I notice with them, genre is not such a consideration as it used to be, which I think is great. So I find there's less tribalism, right?
Yeah.
What I'm kind of getting to is when you went from metal to hip-hop, which is a few years ago now, did it feel like a tribal leap, or was it just like, I'm going to try something else now? Because back in the day, metal, often metal people are really like metal or die, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, it was an entirely new world. It was literally everything about it was new. Like there were things about it that were similar. I'm like, okay, yeah, like a gig is a gig, right? Practice is practice, making music is making music. But the community was entirely different. It was a brand new set of people I was introduced to. There was just even a new culture around gigging. So one of the big things with me is like when I was in middle, all of the gigs I was playing were all ages shows. And at all ages shows, kids go absolutely wild. They mosh, they go crazy. When I started playing hip hop, straight away I started playing R18 shows. And then that was a weird experience for me, playing shows to people just standing there and barely nodding their heads. So I remember my first gig, I thought I did a terrible job because I'm like, why is no one moving? And then I got off stage and people came up to me like, bro, that was one of the best sets I've ever seen. I'm like, but I saw you were standing there docile and you're telling me, and they're like, yeah, man. And so that was weird. That was a weird adjustment for me. The other big adjustment for me was, like, it feels way more, like hip hop felt way more dog eat dog. Like in metal, there was this kind of understanding. It was like, okay, we are this kind of weird subgenre that not many people like. So if we're in it, we're all in it for each other. If I can get you a gig, if I can get you this opportunity, I'll do it for you. If we can do things together, we'll do it for you. That was the culture I came out of. So coming into hip hop, expecting the same thing and being sort of bitterly.
No, I get it. I mean, it's a scene built. It's from nearly the outset on kind of whether it's friendly or not, battling and competition and one up and just doing it, being all you know what I'm saying? Like, I get it. It was just an adjustment. So, because like the metal scene was really my introduction to music industry stuff. It was where like I did the gigs, where I did the gig promos, where we did the band thing, the practice thing. Everything was metal. So coming out of there into hip hop, I just had to make so many adjustments. But yeah, it was cool. It was all good. I'm trying to think, because the date here I've got is that you kind of made that transition around 2016. I'm trying to think where New Zealand hip hop was at the time. We're kind of like
it was a bit earlier than
post
that.
homebrew, kind of and dirty and stuff like that around that time. Like what was popping off?
Yeah, so actually I stopped my metal band's last show was in 2014, and then in 2015. I started doing hip hop. So I started with a hip hop covers band. Actually, I made a hip hop covers band where I was a frontman, and did that.
What sort of stuff were you doing?
Was that?
What sort of stuff were you doing? Like what
we did that song by Will Smith and Drew Hill, Wild Wild West. That was one of the. We did Touch the Sky by Kanye. We did a hip hop cover of Royals by Lorde. We did Empire State of Mind by Jay-Z. So we did a few kind of like more popular hits. And yeah, that was kind of my segue into live hip hop. So like after I did that for a year, I knew I wanted to keep doing it, but I just wanted to do it with my stuff. but I wanted to keep the live band, at least live drummer feel. And so
totally.
The transition would have been 2015. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking. Oh no, actually, no. I'll leave that thought there. Why did Unchained XL get discontinued? So for listeners who don't know, so Maz started off with a different, basically, handle for your hip hop output.
That's right. Yeah. So I started off with so actually, fun fact, I started off with Unchained. Unchained by itself was the very first one. That was end of 2015. It soon became Unchained XL when I was like, okay, so I put out this demo on SoundCloud. I hope it's not there anymore, but that was under the name Unchained. But
well, if you haven't wiped it, it's still there, man.
Apparently, that terrifies me. And then I started. I was like, okay, I want to release some music on Spotify and all that, like proper release. So I had to think about, okay, if I properly released my stuff, if I started really doing this thing, is Unchained going to be a searchable name? Because the big thing for me was like, how are people going to find me? I'm like, well, Unchained is just a word. So how will people find me? So like, I needed something else to it. So I added XL for a few kind of weird reasons. But yeah, so Unchained XL was my name for a little bit, from 2016 to 2020. So I released a few EPs and did a few tours under that name. So I decided to change because, like, first of all, I never really liked it that much. It was kind of like a throwaway word that I came up with and just stuck with. And then as I started releasing music, I'm like, I really should change this name, but I don't know if it's the right time. And then when it came to 2020, I was like, okay, the body of work I was sitting on was actually represented quite an evolution of my sound and an evolution of my direction. And then I'm like, okay, we're starting a new decade. At the time, my wife was pregnant. So I'm like, there are a lot of new things happening. I'm like, if ever there's a time to change, it's now. So I chose Mazbou Q because Mazbou is an anagram of my last name, which is Ozumba. Q is like a phonetic pairing to my birth first name, which is Hugh. And I just wanted a name that felt more like a person. Like rather than a thing. Also
much more linked to who you are and your culture.
Yes.
The other one's a bit more like could be a rapper in LA, could be a rapper in point B.
Exactly. So that was a big thing.
I want to thinking about this conversation of like, you got a nice 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
You see where I'm going. You're working at Serato, actually, which is I'll ask you what you did in a sec. But it's like, please don't take this the wrong way. I'm just being humorous about this. I'll go to your family, whoever. I'm gonna leave my job and I'm gonna become a full-time poet. It's sort of like, it's a big call, especially with a young family and stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, my family were the ones who pushed me to do it.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
Yeah, because I had been doing music on the side the whole time I was working at Serato. So for the first few years, I was still in my middle band, which was called East of Eden at the time. And then I'd sort of left that. I had got married and started my hip hop covers band, and then started my own thing all whilst at Serato. So my family were very aware that music was something that I really, really wanted to do. I just kept finding an excuse to just leave it on the side. I'm like, I've got a job, I've got a career, and blah, 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 blah. So it got to the point where I'm like, I'd worked for a few years. It was around 6.5, coming up to 7 years. My wife and my parents and my sister as well were like, you've got no kids, you've got no debt. If ever there's a time to try music,
give it a crack now. That's awesome, man.
You know what I'm saying? So I did, and the timing made a lot of sense.
Just as an aside, I assume the Serato job was related to software engineering? With your degree?
So I started as a software tester there. And then I sort of progressed on to automation testing, which was more like a coding situation, which was cool. And because of Serato's obviously proximity to music and the music industry, I felt like I was doing a little bit of what I wanted to do.
It's a dream place to work for a lot of people, man.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an engineer and you love music, that's basically it. There's in music now, I think that's here. But back when I started there was only Serato. So like. Yeah, it was a dream job in many, many cases, but it wasn't my dream job. You know what I'm saying? I still realized like my heart was with creating music. I need to be doing that.
That's good, man. And also, a lot of people is just like that other thing of being your own agent. Just like you're now responsible for everything you're doing, deciding what you do next or whatever. There's something to be said for that. There's a comfort in working for an organization, but there's, the flip side of it is that independence.
Yeah, I think the self-employment is something that I don't think I could go back from anytime soon.
Yeah. Hey, the Rap Scientist. So for those who don't know, you kind of got you kind of blew on up in terms of attention, because your social media kind of posts and kind of how you frame yourself as the Rap Scientist have led to a lot of exposure. Like, talk a little bit about that. And firstly, just as a lead kind of topic, like, was that something to grow the audience for your recorded output and your live audience that's turned out to be, a success unto itself? Do you know what I mean? Was it
Yes.
originally to get eyeballs and ears
Yes.
on your creative output?
Precisely. So the first thing is, like, the label, the Rap Scientist, wasn't actually mine. It was bestowed upon me by my audience. What actually happened was at the end of 2021. So we were just had gone into that huge lockdown that we had, that 70-day one or something crazy. So I had my home studio. I'd been, writing some music, and I had a song that was ready to come out, and I was thinking about what the best way would be to promo that. And I did have a TikTok with not a huge following. I think I had around 2,000 people at the time. And I was like, I might try something. So I made this video where it was a short video entitled "Don't Rap on Beat, Rap Behind the Beat." And basically I just talked about my approach to rapping on this particular song. And that resonated with a lot of people. That really caught fire. And it got me from 2,000 followers to 60,000 in a week. And I'm like, okay, wow, this is something's happening here. So I kept making videos in that vein, just talking about how you can sort of use a rhythmic approach to rap. I didn't think it was anything revolutionary. I mean, I was a drummer, so all this stuff was very obvious to me. But apparently the framing and my communication style was something that was like a hit with people. So it really blew up, and I saw a lot of people in my comments being like, yo, this guy's like the rap professor, the rap scientist. And I was like, rap scientist is quite interesting. My mentor at the time, he was like, dude, you should just really lean into this. I was like, that's kind of corny, you know what I'm saying? The rap scientist.
No,
and the guy was like, no, just lean into it.
No, wait, it would be corny if you wore a white lab coat while you did it. So,
That's true.
so we're all good. It seems like I'm interested in the algorithmic side of it, because we're at a point now where social media's been around a long time.
Yes.
So how you find virality, or how people connect with you, has changed. And what I'm meaning there is, back in the day, the kind of classic scenario was, so and so tweeted me or reposted me or whatever on Insta or Facebook. You didn't mention that, so I'm guessing what happened is TikTok's algorithms went in your favor and just pushed it out to the right people.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's essentially what it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, what
I'm saying is you didn't need a big American rapper to repost it. It's just your stuff got pointed to the right people.
Yeah. Having said that, there were a couple of big, like, quantum steps, if you want. Like, one of them was a share from Unilad. So Unilad found my stuff, and they were like, yeah, sweet, let's share this. This is dope. So that got me a big... I mean, I was already viral before that, but that was a big step up.
Yeah.
And then there've been a couple of similar things like that, like similar big pages or big people finding my stuff. But yeah, the virality came before that for sure.
But I'm right, and this is, I'm not telling you what I already know. I genuinely don't know this, because I'm not really a TikTok user, because I feel like if you're not an artist and you're 47-year-old male and you're on TikTok, you probably should be on a list. But anyway, no, what I'm getting at is it is a lot more likely with TikTok's system for stuff to find people without a middle person, right? That's the fundamental difference between how their algorithms work to the others. Yeah, it's interesting. And
that's how it used to be, but not anymore. But yes, you're right.
What's changed now?
Well, everyone's just trying to be TikTok. so
that's what I mean. Yeah.
TikTok was kind of the first platform which was very strongly algorithm based. So at the time when TikTok was really sort of coming up, Instagram was still very much, if you're following someone, that's the content you're going to be seeing, right? You're going to be seeing the content of the people it used to be not even that. It used to be we're going to show the content not only of the people that you're following, but in chronological order. It was like really, and then TikTok came along and was like, we're not really, the following thing doesn't mean anything. We're just going to show you stuff that you like. And we're going to determine what you like based on stuff like how you engage with a video, whether you like it, whether you comment it, how long you spend watching that video. So one of the biggest things for TikTok, and now the rest of social media has adopted this thing, is retention. That's one of the biggest influences of the algorithm. So if you're making a 1 minute video, what percentage of that 1 minute are people watching for? If they're only watching for 2 seconds, we don't care about it. If you're managing to keep people on your video for 40, 50 seconds, that video, we're sending it out to everyone because we want everyone on the platform. So that was what TikTok was about, and subsequently Instagram and everyone else, yeah.
It's really interesting. Have you I assume you've taken kind of an academic approach to it, or what I mean there is basically like, I'm assuming like you've researched a lot of this stuff rather than just go by feel. Like you've have you looked into how algorithms work? It sounds like you have. It sounds like you've got yourself well versed in how it all works, which you kind of have to.
It's a combination of reading a few things, hearing different perspectives, and just piecing things together, and just seeing patterns. So I pride myself on pattern recognition. I think that's a very strong suit of me. I think the pattern recognition is behind the whole rap science thing because, like I said, I'm like, it seems very obvious that the rhythmic stuff that you see in drums is also in rap, but that's just pattern recognition. That's me being able to see a pattern in drums and apply it to somewhere else. So it's the same thing when it comes to social media. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm seeing how this is working because there are some underlying patterns. If you're rapping in triplets but not doing this, your flow is probably boring as hell. Check it out. Okay, so we know our regular triplet flow kind of sounds like this. We're using our tone and volume to accentuate the first syllable of groups of 3 triplets. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Another very popular one is groups of 2. What's less common are groups of 4 and 5, but if you use them, you can create really cool polyrhythms with the accented syllables. 5 is super interesting because it creates this really irregular accent pattern that totally throws you off. I'm gonna demo a quick verse using triplets and accent groups of 3, 4, 5, and 6 so you can hear the difference. Check it out. They up on my comments, so writing the thesis. They love to critique from way up in the bleachers. They ain't got a bar to they name like a hyphen, but acting like cold, them up for a feature. They tell me stay humble, but humility is weaponized against a brilliant balance. Ones who fantasize about achieving accolades when half the size they wanna close a gap, but they don't realize I'm so far ahead they can't comprehend. It's my confidence causing great offense. My condolences to the envious. I've been doing this, they ain't been doing shit. Be the analogy, rappers are human. I'm Hopkins or Anthony. Point is I'm actually better than them. I put that on my family, Alright, that was it. But you can obviously mix them up as well. You can use a grouping pattern of 3, 4, 5, like or any combination you want. Hey, the world's your oyster once you understand what's going on. So next time you're feeling stuck in that regular old triplet flow, try this out. If you know any rappers that use the weirder triplet groups like 4 or 5 or even 7, tuck them in the comments. Let's chop it up. Peace.
The polyrhythm thing, for some reason, particularly took off. That was how I first heard about those videos you were doing. Is that right?
Yeah. So that was one of those quantum leaps. Like when I started really talking about polyrhythm, and I think because again, it was one of these things where it was like people knew about, but they just didn't make the connection to the fact that rappers can do this. Some rappers do this, and it's a useful way to think about how to construct really cool flows. So I think the connections and the way I present it and making it accessible. So one of the big things is a lot of people are like, yo, I studied this in school, but the way you taught
it's how you articulate it in such short, brief terms.
That was a big thing.
Yeah.
So I think the combination of all those things were really what sort of blew me up in that respect. And people are like, oh, yo, man, here's this highly scientific rapper. And all the time I'm like, I don't know if it's that scientific. But I think what's happened is that a lot of the people who study this stuff in music school, like a lot of your jazz students and classical students, a lot of them might be interested in hip hop, but there aren't many who are hip hop practitioners. So the big thing about what I do is that not only do I explain this stuff, I go and then demonstrate it competently. So these people are like, oh, this dude is a rapper. He's not just someone who's watching this stuff and teaching it. He's teaching it and he does it. That's crazy. We have not seen that before.
And polyrhythms are just 2 competing rhythms. At first, I thought it had to be 2 different time signatures, but it's just literally This is actually quite controversial. Like, that's what happened to me today. That's why.
It's controversial. It's not as clear cut as people would love to say. So there are these 2 very related ideas. There's polyrhythms and
Yeah.
polymetricism. So polymetricism is when there are two competing time signatures. Polyrhythms are when there are two contrasting rhythms. Now, the problem is the term contrasting is kind of ambiguous here and needs to be unpacked. What does contrasting mean? I've thought about it, and my understanding of it is when you have two rhythms that are not divisible by each other. So if you have a rhythm that's based on a subdivision of 4, and a rhythm that's based on a subdivision of 2, they're divisible.
Yeah.
They're not contrasting. But if you have one that's based on 3, one that's based on 4, they're not divisible by each other. They have a common factor of 12. So they're going to sound like they're competing against each other. That's where polyrhythms come in. So you can have rhythms that are polymetric, but not polyrhythmic. It gets
But
a
if
bit
a rapper, if so, say it's like a straight up, I hear all of that,
Yeah.
and you explain that really well. But let's just go with a straight up and down like boom bap beat, right?
Yes.
It doesn't change. I would have thought, as I say, I started out thinking you had to be competing time signatures and so on.
Yeah.
I would have thought just a rapper playing around with timing and how many words you can fit in a bar, and also switching up their timing. All of that is kind of would be polyrhythmic. No.
Yeah, honestly, polyrhythmic is a lot more simple than that. If your beat is like this, like 1, 2, 1, 2, and you're rapping but, that's polyrhythm, because my but and the click are sort of interacting with each other in an interesting way.
So that's where I got to. Most MCs are.
Yeah.
polyrhythms.
A lot of them use polyrhythm without knowing. And so one of the big things about why my videos are very interesting to a lot of people is because it's giving concept and terminology and category to what a lot of rappers are doing. So one of the most common comments you'll find on my videos are, "Yo, I did this. I didn't really know that. I didn't even know that was what I was doing." He's like, "Yeah."
So I got to tell you, like, I was going to talk to you about engaging with audience, because that can be a real sticky thing on social media, and strangers can be terrible.
Oh yeah.
But I loved that one when you talked about like rapping slack off the beat. You're kind of, to me, like talking about the MC version of what Dilla's famous for, right?
Yes.
And I don't know if you remember this, but it was such a great video, and I watched it, and then right at the top of the comments, user 338545546.
It's always that. It's always that.
Yeah, no, but it's part of it. Wait, who the hell raps behind a beat? LMAO, you got to rap with the beat, and then you. So this is such a good takedown. Jay, Nas, Redman, Royce, just some of the best rappers that have ever lived. But teach us, and then you bothered to type out user 3385445. And I was like, but yeah, no. In all seriousness, that side of it, like, I imagine what you're doing, you don't attract a lot of weirdos, but yeah, have you had sort of like, yuckiness in your comments or whatever? And how do you deal with that? Do you just ignore?
So much. Sometimes I engage with it. Sometimes
that one was good.
Yeah. Sometimes I engage with it because sometimes I'm like, I have time today. But a lot of it is because even though a lot of those comments are negative, that might be snarky and there might just be people hating. Sometimes they hit at an underlying point that kind of needs to be addressed, not for them,
totally,
but for the people reading the comments. Because
which is what that one was in essence.
Exactly, if someone's on the fence reading and being like, I don't know if this guy, like, I think, and they see a hater comment and they're like, actually, kind of agree. And then I come through and I'm like, actually, no, this is what it is. Then they're like, actually, okay, that makes sense. So I rarely do it for the people that are arguing with me. And I sort of hit the ones that I think are making a point that a lot of people might be thinking.
But otherwise, I think the rule goes, don't feed the trolls. That's why I'd struggle to be a public figure, man. Like or I would get someone else to deal with all my comments.
Yeah, I think what really helps is when you realize that everyone gets trolled. So I think at the start, when you start becoming like a public figure and you start raising your profile, up until that point, you've assigned all the feedback that you get to your value. You're like, okay, people are giving me positive feedback. That means I'm good. So then when you get outside of your immediate network and you start getting comments from people who don't care about you, and a lot of those can be negative, then you start being like, oh, they're negative, therefore my stuff isn't really that good. That's where you start getting, into mental turmoil. But the big switch for me was when I actually paid attention to some of the comments on some of the best artists. Like, you can go to a Michael Jackson video.
Oh, dude,
and
absolutely.
people will be like, this is trash. Like Michael Jackson? You know, so if there are going to be people saying that about Michael Jackson, how much more me? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not, if Michael Jackson's not above it, Kendrick Lamar, if Adele, if they're not above people ripping into them, then I can't be above it. You know what I'm saying? And then, you know, you realize, and again, the fact that it's user 5533 whatever is actually a very important thing, because it's usually those kind of people. And,
absolutely.
You know
You're doing something. You're doing something, and they're not, and that's their way of doing something. It's pretty basic psychology. And also, as you reminded me, a colleague said this to me once. I can't remember something. It's somehow. We have anonymous student feedback on our teaching at work.
Oh, yeah.
And again, my sensitivity that I need to get over, but something really stung me and whatever. And a colleague said, "Look, at the end of the day, anonymous feedback ain't shit, basically. It's like the best feedback is when there's a person connected to it that you either know or you know of, or you could contact if you wanted, you know." Anyway, enough said. Obvious examples of polyrhythm, to get surely Miss Sugar. Surely.
So Bleed was one of the first songs, like in my metal era, Bleed was one of the songs I sort of was fascinated
He's amazing.
by.
He's got to be one of your favourite drummers, surely.
Oh, yeah. Like, just incredible. Like, the innovation is just unreal. And Tool as well. Tool was great. Danny Carey. But yeah, so, yeah, Bleed was crazy. So the thing that a lot of, and some people are starting to make this connection now, like a lot of those chuggy rhythms in metal, like the breakdowns and all that kind of stuff, are just rhythms that I'm using to rap. Or rhythms that I'm identifying in rap. I'm like, yeah, this is actually. So a lot of metalheads are following me and be like, oh yeah, like I don't even listen to rap, but this is cool because this is the kind of stuff I listen to. I'm like, yeah, it's all the same.
Of countless examples, I'm just being a bit indulgent now. When I thought about rappers who play around with rhythms in a way that I like, and there's a long list, but there's a dude called Open Mike Eagle that I really really dig, and I was stoked to see that someone else in New Zealand knows about Antiballus. I discovered them at
Antiballus are great.
Amazing. They're from New York. And like I caught them because I know you played WOMAD. Perfect time. It was like 1-2 in the afternoon. Beautiful weather. The side of that lake thing or whatever. And they had that really nice kind of mid-afternoon slot. And I was like, this band is one of the most... The longer you've been listening to music, I don't know about you, but the harder it is to get like truly blown away by something, you know. And that was one of the last times it happened. It was quite a few years ago when they played.
I really love Antiballus because I had a massive Fela Kuti era. Like that was my main entrance to like hip hop. Like I wanted to make. My idea of what I wanted my hip hop to be when I first started making my own music, I was like, I basically just want to be Fela Kuti with a rapper. So when I found a band like Antiballus and another one, I don't know if you heard of a band based in Cardiff called Afro Cluster. They're basically Fela's band with a rapper. I love that so much. So yeah, a lot of that music I really appreciate.
We've just done something really good for podcast land because I know that I've listened to podcasts, I've been writing down stuff that people are talking about. So there's a list of some artists, folks. And like the other thing with kind of social media, the next step when you get a lot of like quite a following, and I know it is about, you know, it's broadening out, you know, it's opportunities for you. We could talk about you ending up in Berkeley, which is crazy in a sec, but also at growing your music. There then also, I assume, becomes opportunities for like monetization, to use that buzzword, or like brand partnerships. Yeah. Are you interested in any of that? Are you doing any of that? Have people approached you? Is it harder in New Zealand than if you were based in LA or London, you know?
I imagine it's a little bit harder. I've got a brand agent, so I work with Johnson and Laird. They've been handling me for a year and a half. Also, so yeah, they everything sort of passes through them, and they're out there kind of seeking opportunities for. I've had a couple of good ones, which have been fun. I think that the challenge is like finding a brand that it makes sense for me to partner
Absolutely.
with. Yeah. So I've had a few reach out to me, and I'm like, I think if I start advertising, this band's going to pollute what I'm doing.
I wish you just pulled out a tube of Colgate then and went, but when I'm cleaning my teeth, the other one is obviously like it boils down to your own worldview and all of that as well in terms of what you choose. But then also when you've done stuff like sort of like artfully incorporating it into what you do, like, you know, how do you rep that brand? Like, do you do it in posts and stuff? So there's all of that to think about.
Yeah. It's not super easy. I prefer when brands reach out to me. One of the sort of litmus tests for me is like, can I just make my content and incorporate your brand in it somehow. Because
Yeah.
what I don't want to do is start making different content just for a brand. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
kind of what I'm meaning.
Yeah,
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 you
yeah.
want to still keep you doing what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah.
Staying on the business thing, although this was totally about music as a cultural movement as well. I don't know if you remember this, so it's cool if you don't. But when I first thought about getting you on the podcast was like recently you were interviewed for an episode of that RNZ podcast, The Detail, and I thought you really did really well breaking down like how music's changed in terms of where it sits with audiences. Do you remember that? You said something like,
Yeah.
music's not front and center anymore. And as a kind of, without sounding like a wanker, as an academic, I've thought about this before, and I've kind of talked about it in lectures and stuff. Like, what's your take on where music sits in your kind of ecosystem of being a social media guy, a music guy? Like, what is different about how audiences, particularly younger audiences, interact with music now?
Yeah, so what I was getting at in that interview was the idea of music being a soundtrack for people's lives, or more specifically, a soundtrack for how ideas are communicated on the internet. And you know, that's basically called memology, like the idea of memes, and memes is memes used to be just pictures, right? But it's broader than that now. It's entire ideas. It's like it can be entire videos, or like they even call Ice Spice a meme rapper, which is very interesting. But yeah, so it's like this, a communicating of an idea through social media, through mainly short form video. Music basically supports that now. So if your music can't communicate an idea, can't be used to communicate an idea, then it's going to be very difficult for you to get anywhere, because but there's a practical aspect. Number one, because that's just how stuff's getting shared now, and stuff's getting discovered. It's getting discovered through short form video. But number two, that's also what resonates with a lot of young people. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
Like, if these ideas are matched with music, and then the music resonates with them. Yeah.
And there's totally, and there's you can come at this from a lot of different approaches. Like, I think another thing is that music isn't sought out and owned now. Like, you used to go and drop a wedge of money on some music, you'd take it home. Like, so now it's kind of like, it's sort of permanently leased, isn't it? You can come in and out of Spotify and so on. So I think that affects as well. And I think stuff like, things like gaming becoming really prominent. You can see how music's a really important part of gaming, but for someone who's really into that, it's kind of like music sits as it's what you're saying. I believe I'm saying what you're saying in a different context.
Yeah. Well, okay. So to sum it up, music is ceasing to be an end to itself. Like, it's not an end. Like, before, music used to be an end. I used to go to the CD store to get the CD, to put it in my Walkman or my thing at home, to listen to the music, and that's my activity because I enjoy music. But music's no longer, it hasn't completely moved from there, but it is moving away from there. It's moving, like, listening to music is less and less an experience of itself, and more, like I say, to support something, or to be joined to something, support gaming, support memes on the internet, support TikTok videos. So, it's to be partnered or joined with something, and less like, yo, this is what we're listening.
Well,
and
what you've done is really positive and really smart and the right way to go. And I just say that because I'm paraphrasing the PhD I wrote in 2016, which was kind of about shifting music consumption, and I can paraphrase that into one sentence. It was adapt or die.
That's 100% what it is,
right? Yeah. So people who go, oh shit, the good old days, blah blah blah. It's they might have, the aspects of those were the good old days. We can always do that. We can be nostalgic, but if you're going to get left behind with that stubborn attitude, then
exactly, and that's what I tell a lot of sort of artists, a lot of my peers now who are like, oh, I just don't like doing social media. I'm like, okay, sweet, don't. But you're not going to grow. Like, you know what I mean? Don't expect, don't be sad about the fact that you're not growing if you're not doing the thing that's going to grow you. You know what I'm saying? Like, you kind of have to do it.
Sorry. Can you look at like analytics now and like, say, for example, when you do go over, and I don't know what takes precedence in your overseas trips, but I know, as I say, you've gone and spoken at Berkeley and so on. Mm-hmm. Assuming you have done shows overseas, can you look at your analytics now and go, okay, that's a safer place to play than somewhere, the city over or whatever, based on where my social media traffic's coming from?
Yeah.
Or do you do that?
Yeah, you can.
Because I know comedians do that in terms
Yes.
of like booking out where to go, you know?
Yeah, like your Spotify or even your Instagram demographic. Yeah, will give you an insight onto where, like, for example, I'm playing a show this Saturday, and I'm actually crafting my set list carefully because, like, I'm playing a set of songs. And I know I've told some of my friends which songs I'm playing. They're like, hang on, why aren't you playing this song? This song is your biggest song. I'm like, you need to see the demographics because that song is my biggest song in the US. There's no one in New Zealand listening to that song. So what's the point of me playing it? So these are the kind of considerations that we have to make for sure.
What mistakes do you see people making on social media, man?
Man, I could talk for a long time about this, but basically, basically to try and summarize it, people haven't realized that social media has moved on from being connection based to being content based. So what I mean is, like, where a lot of the musicians that are my peers came up when social media was this thing where, let me connect with my friend that I haven't seen in a long time, or my coworker from this, or my family member from this, and let's share pictures of our cat or our brunch or blah blah blah. So we're all about like this whole connection based thing. I'm seeing the content from people who I follow because we're connected now. Social media moved on from there, and for whatever reason, capitalism, and became about content and became about this thing where we're now divided between content creators and content consumers, and creators' job is to make this content that keeps people on the platform. And now algorithms are now the thing that determine what you see more than ever. And algorithms are tailored to keep you on the platform. So they're showing you things you want to see. So what the mistake that a lot of my peers are making is that they think that they can just make their music and say, hey, here's my music, and expect the same people that would be into it a couple years ago to now see it. The problem is they're not even seeing it. It's not that their stuff is less popular, it's that they're not even seeing it.
Yeah.
Because it's not the kind of content that people are interacting with now. It's not the kind of content that's keeping people on the platform. I don't care about a 20-second snippet of your music video. I don't care about a 10-second thing of you talking to camera being like, hey, my song's out there. I'm not going to watch that. What I am going to watch is something entertaining, something gripping, something compelling, something that makes me laugh or cry, something that makes me want to discuss something. I'm going to interact with content that keeps me gripped. So you have to integrate your music into that kind of content.
What I see you doing is the content you're making is actually it's soul food for you as well. Do you know what I mean? I think if you're trying to get, because you could be really cynical and say, oh yeah, you're talking about like you've got to set some bait. I mean, that's what kind of sales and connection and stuff's about. Yep. But if you're going to do that, you've got to do it. And I'm just riffing now as I reflect on what you just said. Surely for that to be sustainable, particularly if we go with the creative temperament, and that's a whole other conversation, is you don't want to do something that's soul destroying. So you're actually doing something that's as enjoyable as the music in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, so when I talk to a lot of people about, because a lot of people come to me about content tips now that they see my social media has done well, and they're like, well, what kind of content should I make? And I'm like, there are a few options in terms of what will be compelling content, but it has to be something that sort of naturally flows out of you. So naturally for me, I'm a teacher. Like in whatever context I am, I'll be seeking to understand something and explain it to you. Even if it's not for your sake, even just because I process things externally. So a lot of the time it's just for me. The fact that I can teach someone is like, that's just for me to understand. But I'm naturally teaching people and explaining things to people from first principles all the time. So for me to do this is a very natural extension of me. Yes, it's hard work, and yes, it's commitment, and yes, it's a lot of discipline, but it's something that's very natural for me to do. So whatever, like there are people, for example, Connor Price is an extremely successful rapper out of Canada at the moment. He makes amazing content, but he's a child actor. So all his skits that he does that are really entertaining and really cool are because he's naturally like a theatrical performer. So whatever content you make has to naturally be you, for sure.
And like you basically said, and it's evidence that you are able to explain quite complex, well, things you don't think are complex, but other people have. You're able to, let's say, dilute them down into a short, succinct set of ideas that people connect with. There's naysayers who go, our attention spans are disappearing, they're dropping, nobody can take in a whole lot of information at the moment. my counter argument to that is actually, because I've been a teacher long enough now, is it's actually been really good for me having to make stuff as succinct and short as possible, because it used to be I'm the teacher, so therefore I have to have this big long lofty video or document explaining this thing. But actually doing the same thing in 2 minutes is good for everybody.
Oh yeah,
and that's how better teachers run their courses and stuff now.
Absolutely. I mean, like, so the Instagram reel limit is 1 minute 30. So if it goes over 1 minute 30, it becomes a post and it won't go into the algorithm. So for me, I'm like, how do I condense this idea? Because sometimes I'll be like, okay,
you get better at it, I know from experience.
Well, that's the thing. I'm like, here's me rapping 7/8 over 12/8. Okay. Now I need to explain what 7/8 is, what 12/8 is, why them interacting is very interesting in 1 minute 30 to people who don't even know what time signature is. It's a massive undertaking, but like, you know, you learn what shortcuts that you can take. You learn what's not necessary, like the kind of waffle that you might have usually.
Absolutely.
You're like, okay, now we'll cut all that out. You know, cut all that out.
My recent one is a QR code in the recording studio, the new studio I'm bringing students into, and it's like, if I show everyone the how to operate it in person, I explain all of that, but you're always going to need troubleshooting, right? Yeah. It used to be a big, long document stuck there. So it's like they scan the QR code, the video comes up for that particular topic. And long story short is, I went in there, I'll record a 2-minute video in 2 takes or whatever. It's like the first one was 7 minutes, the second one was 6 minutes, and then... but you do get better at it, and the takes get less.
And also, you kind of make decisions about things where it's like, okay, I know people aren't really going to understand this. That's okay, because it will make them ask for more, or make them ask me, hey, do you have a course? Hey, do you have something I can buy? And that's an avenue for, like, that's another business avenue, right? So you don't, there's a sense in you, like, not wanting to sort of show all your cards, or for me in particular, I'm like, sometimes I just want to sound a bit esoteric. I want to sound accessible but esoteric. I want to sound like you almost understand it. But I want you to also realize that you don't really get it like that, and you need some extra help, and you're going to pay me for that.
Damn, that is strategic. Yeah. That's what it's about. Life strategic.
Yeah.
Does the last thing on, I guess, kind of business, quote unquote, does music still sell? I know you've got a Bandcamp. I know you sell your album for, is there an income stream for recorded music?
Potentially, but you just have to be really killing it. So like I refer to Connor Price, like he gets a few 100 million streams. I think he's just hit a couple billion streams actually across his whole catalog. And his catalog is independently owned, which is crazy. So if you're doing those kind of numbers, you're making bank. If you're not, then it's hard, and you have to. It's hard just on music alone. But as we've discussed, like, in many opportunities come along. So for me, I'm a producer as well, right? So when people hear my music, when people see me doing this content and speaking intelligently about music, they're like, I'm going to go to him to produce my stuff.
So you do the classic, like, sell beats, do you?
Not as much. I'm more like, I have people in my studio and I'll make,
Got you. Producer in that sense.
Yes, yeah.
That, as I say, I had this conversation the other day. That word producer can mean so
very
many different things
very ambiguous
across media.
So there's that, and then there's also music sync as well. So I've had a few brands be like, can we use your music for this thing? Those have been massive payouts. And then there's there's the brand affiliation. So there are all these things that come with an elevated profile and in sort of just doing music well that aren't necessarily just the income stream. So I tell people not to be too discouraged by the fact that, the music itself is hard to make money from, but being a musician, there are multiple avenues if you sort of explore them.
Yeah, what's that term for teeing up your music with ads and stuff?
Sync,
there's like a what's it called?
Sync.
Sync.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Ticky's talked publicly about how, when the bank brought You're Always on my mind, his whole his whole life changed.
Yeah, it literally can be very life changing. Like, even for me, so I had one of my songs was used as the All Blacks Get Up For It campaign. This is Sky TV Get Up For It campaign. When I saw the figure they were offering, I was like,
okay.
Well, no, literally, I was just like, okay, like, I can literally take the next 4 or 5 months off. I'm not going to, because I'm still going to hustle, but I could. So, and I was like, that song, making that much money from that sync is more money than my entire catalog has made from streaming, and it will probably ever make from streaming. You know what I'm saying?
It's a shame that we don't have residuals here, eh?
Yeah.
My understanding is you do the same. Like if you get on I could be wrong, this could be old information, but at least in the past, I think if you got on like a soundtrack for, I think the system's different overseas, isn't it? Some places you end up getting payments if something's picked up again, or if I got that wrong?
No, that works. It honestly just depends on what the deal is. So you got to be smart about those things. Yeah.
Sorry, mate, to cut you off there totally. I used to do voiceover work for money, and I know that in New Zealand it's a lump payment. But say, for example, in the UK, even if you recorded that ad 2 years ago, and that campaign gets picked up again, you get. You know, it's like getting a royalty check.
Yeah, no, I do voiceover work, and it depends on it depends on a few things. But yeah, some deals are like that. Like some deals, like you run the ad during the campaign, and then like they'll ask for, hey, can we run this ad in this area, or can we run it for 2 extra months? And then you'll need to be paid. But you need to negotiate that deal.
We'll pivot to something very away from business. In 2020, you. Organised, or one of the organisers of the Black Lives Matter protests in Auckland. Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously being like a Nigerian New Zealander, like a Black African New Zealander, like I've experienced racism myself, and whilst like my identity is not the same as that of a Black American, like there's a lot of overlap, and a lot of what they experience and suffer like I do. So when I see instances of racism, instances of racial violence in America, that resonates with me and my community here quite deeply, and it kind of all just like bubbled up around it. I mean, there were global protests in 2020. So when that George Floyd situation really sort of popped off, there were a couple people here that were like, yo, we got to do something. And initially I was a little bit hesitant and resistant to, just because, just practically speaking, like what they were proposing, like literally what happened, it was like a Sunday afternoon. I remember this specifically. I just finished at the gym, and my friend had called me. He's like, yo, we got to do a protest tomorrow. And I'm like, I was like, dude, do you know how much organization it takes to do it? We've been doing a protest tomorrow.
Oh, sweet, I'll see you at the bus stop.
Bro,
like,
exactly. And so I literally told him, like, bro, like we can't do this. And he's like, bro, I know what you're saying, but we just have to. And so I was just like, okay, we'll tell you what, don't do anything. Let me call a couple of my mates and we'll have a meeting tonight. And in my head, I was like, my couple of mates are going to come and convince this person that it's not going to happen, right? But I'm like, so don't do anything in the meantime. Anyway, a couple hours later, I'm on my phone checking Facebook. I see this event page, Black Lives Matter protest tomorrow, and I was like, my brother, what have you done? And then I see the attending list, and it's got like 5,000 or 6,000 people because Paris Global had shared it, Israel Adesanya had shared it, and I'm just like, oh, okay, so now we've got 5,000 people thinking that they're going to come to Aotea Square for this massive organized protest, and we haven't done anything. So we're at that meeting that night, and we're like, okay, well, I guess it's happening now because we've been steam trained over by you doing this against our wishes, but let's try and make this happen. So we called the council, we called the local iwi. We did as much as we can to just get things as orderly as possible. And as you know, that was around when COVID was at level 2. So we also had those considerations
everyone.
as
I mean,
well.
technically, everyone broke lockdown.
Yeah. Well, actually, we were allowed out, but we weren't. The restrictions we were supposed to have was like we weren't supposed to gather more than 100 people, and we had to have a meter between us. So our whole thing was like, okay, we weren't trying to bring more than 100 people together, and we were going to do the meter thing, but there just ended up just being too many people. And we're like,
and I worried the way I said that your reaction for a sec was like I sounded accusatory. Not at all.
Right,
Great. It was timely. You know, it had to happen. But I was more actually, you brought up the COVID thing because I was thinking, you know, hindsight being 2020, like most of us were quite loopy around those years. So what I'm getting at is kind of tensions were high anyway. Never mind going out for a really significant protest and all those people coming on. And man, I imagine that the energy there was palpable. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I find really interesting is that a lot of the people who had problems with our protest and were saying, "Oh, I can't believe they did this in level 2," were the same ones that were denying that COVID was much of a problem, and the same ones saying that the vaccine is a problem. So I'm like, well, pick your problem, then. You can't have both. But yeah, so we did the protest, and it was incredible. I think it was like 15,000 people ended up.
Amazing.
Coming there, yeah, and we gave some powerful speeches and spoke to the media and stuff, and yeah.
And I like how you from there, like, it was a conversation, and I'll be straight up. I just found this out when I did my research on you. I haven't actually read or engaged with anything yet, but it went on to you kind of commentating on cultural appropriation. And I find that really interesting because I think often that idea and that term is used poorly and applied to the wrong things.
Yeah, I agree.
Because, forms of cultural appropriation are how, liking a genre and, emulating whatever. I'm getting a little off track.
No, you're
right.
It
was interesting what you said about appropriation of Black American culture because, that really bugged me, particularly like what they call the noughties, the early 2000s, when like there was just like the music industry just seemed to be about like white people buying records by thugs, the kind of manufactured thug was bothered me. Yeah. And also at gigs, I always feel really kind of embarrassed, even though they're often doing it quite innocently, like people kind of like white people, let's face it, like throwing signs and kind of almost doing like an animated acty version of the culture. Yeah. Where am I going with this? I don't know.
Yeah, no. So I think there is a bit of a somewhat of a spectrum or a range of ideas around cultural appropriation. So some people are sort of at the end where it's like, yo, you are only allowed to interact with your culture, which I think is just not practical at all. And then there's the other end where it's just like, hey, it's free for all. You can do whatever you want, which I also think is like rife with problems. Like my sort of view is somewhere where I'm like, cultural exchange is possible. You can interact with other people's cultures, but you have to always be mindful of the people and how your actions are affecting people, and just be aware of the fact that culture doesn't exist without the people. I think so. One of the biggest conversations I had here was with hip hop stations here, like My FM, where I was like, look, you guys have not said a thing about Black Lives Matter, which is a problem because your entire radio station is based on black music. That is a problem. Yeah. We don't, I don't care that you play black music. I don't care that like Pacifican and Māori artists perform black music. I do not care about that. That's fine. What I do care about is when you guys profit off that culture, but then turn around and ignore the issues, or even worse, tell us to shut up when we bring them up.
You're smart enough to know that is how commercial radio operates. Just don't keep the academic term's the buying mood. Just keep people in the buying mood.
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
So you're having those sort of conversations. You're not selling whiteware in the break.
Yes,
but
exactly.
I hear you.
Yeah,
totally.
but
did they respond in any constructive way? Did you get anywhere with that?
So we a group of us were invited on to have this really frank dialogue, which was positive. Whether there was lasting change from that, it's hard to say. So one of the biggest pain points for a lot of artists here is that like African musicians are actually overrepresented in when it comes to the upper echelons of music here, especially in hip hop. Like just the fact that Jess B has been 100. One of the biggest rappers in New Zealand. Razor Biza, you've got myself. Like, in terms of how many Africans there are here, the fact that so many are doing stuff at a national level is significant. So the pain point is like seeing these opportunities that should go to us that are not going to us, and then we're being gaslit into believing that it's because we're not good enough. When in actual fact, what's happening is that these opportunities are being gatekept by communities for whom the music does not belong. Like that's the annoying thing. I'm like, okay, it's cool for you to do these festivals and do these radio stations, do all this kind of stuff. But then when black people come and be like, hey, can we do it too? Don't be like, nah, you're not good enough. That's like, come on now.
Going to Berkeley, Bo, did you pinch yourself? Like, that is
Yes.
quite... like, you went over and lectured at one of the most prestigious music schools in the world.
Yeah, that I still don't really...
Nervous? Nervous? Were you nervous?
I was shaking, man. Thankfully, that was the last stop on that speaking tour, so I had already done the lecture, like, 6 or 7 times. So by the time I got to... I actually really nailed the Berkeley one. That was the only one I cared about. Like, I'd done Harvard, I'd done LSU, and I'd done Southern. And they were all great, but I was like, I need to nail Berkeley. You know what I'm saying? I need to nail Berkeley.
How long is it out of interest? 20 minutes? 40, how long do you present
Oh,
for?
no, like the Berkeley one was like 90 minutes.
No way, that's longer than a lecture at our work.
It was
Oh my
long.
God.
I had around sort of close-ish to 2 hours worth of material. I had to basically have about 5 different versions of the presentation, because at some classes were like, okay, we've got a 50-minute class, or we've got an hour class, or we've got a class of juniors, or we've got a class of just music professors. So, there's like material considerations, like the level of what I'm talking about.
You had to teach to a room full of just music professors.
That was wild. At
Dude.
at LSU, I did what was called the music seminar or something like that, and it was literally just musicologists that I was talking to, and I was, oh my gosh, but they loved it. They loved it because for them, they were like, okay, they're seeing it less about, okay, here's some stuff about polyrhythms we don't know. It's more like, here's a way of communicating these things to our students. Because our students don't really like classical like that, or they're not really that into jazz like that. A lot of them are into hip hop. How do we, hey, you can teach all these things to those students now, because here's a way of, or the other thing that was exciting for them is like, here's a way of bringing like contextualization and categorization and classification into this genre called hip hop, because that hasn't really been done, or it's in its infancy. Like, there are a lot of people who are trying to do it, especially in the sort of lyrical domain. A lot of people who are trying to teach rap in that sense, like the poetic side. But in terms of the rhythmic and music side, like what's actually going on when rappers are doing these things. Sure, there's all these like rhythm theory things that exist that are common knowledge in music, but there's also a step above that where there's stuff that's specific to rap. There's stuff that only rappers do. And I'm starting to sort of unlock and bring light to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
And you just made me realize that, when I think about, like, okay, let's a class on hip hop. I'm being really intentionally broad there for reasons that'll become apparent in a second. That's not a radical idea now. We've seen it's been professors and lecturers for years now that have done that. But when I think about it, most of it, you're so right. Most of it is kind of what you call kind of ethnomusicology.
Yes.
So like talking about the culture and stuff around that. So
the history.
those KRS-One lectures,
Yep.
he's not really talking about the mechanics of what he does.
Yeah.
He's doing really interesting seminars on like hip hop in relation to gender and history and politics and so that's interesting, bro. And then lastly, we're going to wrap on up. Man, this 75, 80 minutes is flowing by, which is always a good sign. You're going to do a residency there now, an artist in residency?
Yeah,
Is that
it's
coming
just
up this
a
year?
very short one. It's like
short
Berkeley run this summer program where they get artists in for sort of 4 to 5 days. They do a series of workshops with the students who are there over the summer. So it's just like songwriting, it's production, it's that kind of stuff. Yeah. And
so not enough to like relocate the family or anything. You're just going to go over for a little while.
Yeah, no. So I'll just be there in June. Doing a few things. I'll be doing the residency thing there. I'll be doing hopefully a few other lectures. But yeah, I'm trying to get over to the States a lot more now because there are a lot more opportunities like that, and it may end up being a relocation thing. It just depends on what unfolds over the next year or so.
Bro, America is such an interesting relationship with people trying to make it over there from New Zealand over the years. If the opportunities are presenting themselves now, I'm totally preaching to the choir here, but you got to strike while the iron's hot and other such cliches. Lastly, on your website, bro, it says coming soon.
Yeah, the rap
science course.
Yeah, so I've
Let's
been chipping away at that for literally a year and a half. So this thing, I literally thought I'd be done by this time last year, but it takes a lot more work than I first anticipated. But I think what I have is a really strong product. So it's the Intro to Rap Flow course. So it's like an introductory course. It covers the fundamentals of rhythm. So this will help a lot of people who sort of come and they're like, oh, I don't actually understand anything about rhythm and music, but I do want to learn. You know, I'm too shy to ask. I'm too shy to approach them and, you know, ask for a class. But hey, I want to learn something about music, you know. So it's the people who just want to learn something about rhythm, even if you're a rapper or not. But it kind of relates all these things to hip hop. And then it goes into sort of more technical things like syncopation and swing and stuff like that. It gives them, and what it's doing is like building up the foundation. Okay, how can I have a solid rap flow on basically any beat? How can I approach rapping and my flow on any beat? You know, so that'll be really
like
cool.
you're like where specifics aren't needed, but something along the lines of like drop you some like a subscription in PayPal or wherever, and then you get the whole series of lessons from you, something like that. That kind of
I'm thinking it might just be like a sort of one-off purchase. Like, here, you know, give me this much money, and you get 20 videos. And once you've finished, like, there are exercises and there's homework in there. So once you've finished that, once you've done it, and you feel like you've mastered anything those swing, you should be able to like rap flow on a beat any beat.
I'm kidding here because I know the course has got a beginning, middle, end. But you of all people would know that the subscription model's the way to go, mate. You just got to keep putting out episodes for the next 40 years.
I think that, I just really think that would frustrate people, because I'm thinking about like, if I wanted to really learn something and you're telling me that I only get one video a week,
that's right. Come on, Adobe. Come on, all these companies who started doing this.
Right.
We don't own stuff anymore. It's a nightmare. Hey, it's been a pleasure, bro. Just in closing, and I hope you've enjoyed the chat too.
Yeah, man.
Where can people find you online? So, socials, connecting with the music, let us know.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and everything is like that website /MAZBOUQ. No spaces in there, but it's called Mazbou Q. But yeah, I'm on anywhere that you can find social media, anywhere that you can, even LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, anywhere that you can find socials, anywhere that you can find music, I'm there under that name.